All right. Well, we are very fortunate this morning to have Chris Farrell. Chris joined Judicial Watch in 1999 as the director of investments and research, investigations and research. He's a distinguished military graduate of Fordham University, Army intelligence officer, counterintelligence specialty, Defense Intelligence Agency military operations training courses that he has either taken and taught, specialist in unconventional warfare and terrorism, 3-time tours of Germany, one of Supreme headquarters in Europe, civilian contractor after he got out of the military to the intelligence community, dozens of articles, TV appearances, articles on terrorism and so on. Now he's also an adjunct professor at George Mason University, very active in intelligence community, and has done a marvelous job as far as I'm concerned with Judicial Watch. Chris Farrell.
Mic up here. Have my instructions. Well, thank you very much, Tom, and thank all of you. It's a great pleasure to be back with you. I guess I was here about a year ago, and I talked about the work of Judicial Watch, what we do and how we do it. I made a few predictions, and I'm happy to say that my predictions came true. Not necessarily because the outcome or the results were what anybody expected or anticipated, but just to let you know, or to give you a sense of the impact of our work, sort of the insights or the editorial, the analytical work that we do, how that plays itself out and how that comes to fruition. So what I'd like to do is give you a sense of the work that we're doing and where we're going, where we're headed. Obviously, there's been a radical change in government from one administration to the next. I'm going to say a few things this morning to sort of provoke you, to give you some things to think about. I'd rather spend more time answering your questions than hearing me go on. I guess to start off with, there's a few people I can see in the audience who were here a year ago, recidivists, folks that or want some more abuse or some more mistreatment. So we'll provide that to you. Where to begin? If you don't know about Judicial Watch, we're a watchdog organization, a government watchdog. And what we do is we promote transparency, integrity, and accountability in government politics and the law. That's sort of our mission statement or our byline. We do that a variety of ways. There's all sorts of nonprofits and think tanks in Washington, D.C. that put out all kinds of great information. They hold conferences, they publish papers, and that's great. We do all those things too. But here's the margin of difference. We litigate. We take the government and government officials to court, and we sue them in their official capacity and sometimes in their personal capacity. And we do that because it's the only real way to force accountability. You can talk incessantly, you can write all these brilliant papers and have these grand ideas, but how do you get accountability? And in our experience over the last 22 plus years, the only way you get accountability is by litigating, because you drag the government in front of a federal district court judge, and in large part, a huge amount of work that we do has to do with the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. And that is the open records law. That allows you, in fact anyone, to file a request with the government and say, we would like documentation concerning X, whatever the topic is. The government by statute has 20 days to reply. They routinely blow that deadline. And then they open themselves, they have exposure legally to being sued to compel them to comply with the law. And we do that. We do that a lot. To give you a sense of how often we do it or how much we do it, we currently have about 4,800 Freedom of Information Act requests under active management. That would be our database of requests that we have. So for us, doing a Freedom of Information Act request is akin to you going to Jiffy Lube, right? We can crank them out in about 20 minutes, literally. So we're very good at it. We have it down to a science. We don't litigate all of them, obviously. You have to kind of pick and choose what our attorneys are going to spend their time on. We have 10 attorneys on staff. We do all of our own work. It's in-house. We don't farm anything out. There's times, of course, when we engage local counsel. If we're litigating in a court where one of our attorneys is not a member of the bar, we have to get a local counsel. And frankly, you want a local counsel because they know all the tricks of the trade, the rules locally. But all the work, all the content, all the thinking and the writing is ours. So when I was last here, I talked about a few different things. I talked about Director Comey, or now ex or former Director Comey. I made it very clear to you that I held him in very low regard, and I gave you examples why. And particularly, I talked about the fact that FBI agents, corrupt FBI agents, in the El Paso office of the FBI, had really endangered confidential informants, that I had firsthand knowledge of this, that I had brought it to Senator Grassley and to the Judiciary Committee, that it involved an Inspector General's investigation at the Justice Department that went on for more than a year, that Mr. Comey had knowledge of this, and that he failed to do anything. In July of last year, I also made it very clear that Mr. Comey was complicit in the, I don't even want to call it an investigation, it was more kabuki theater, but the Hillary Clinton's email server, a very important thing, 22 top secret sensitive compartmented information. It's the highest category of intelligence information that we have. 22 top secret SCI emails went across Hillary Clinton's outlaw server. And you'll remember that on the 5th of July, Mr. Comey got up and gave a 15-minute press briefing, not a press conference, didn't take questions. And in that 15 minutes, he laid out all the elements of the crime of violating 18 U.S. Code Section 793F. And I'm sure all of you know exactly what that is. But that is mishandling of national defense information. The reason why I know what that is because in my past professional life, as Tom mentioned, I was an Army counterintelligence officer and a special agent of Army counterintelligence. And I conducted counterespionage investigations, offensive counterespionage operations, and then I was cross-trained as a human intelligence case officer. So I'm not guessing at this stuff. I've done it for a living. I've put 6 bad guys in jail for committing espionage against the United States. In one case it wasn't necessarily jail, but we neutralized them in the sense that we made it known to the service he was working for that the jig is up, it's over. And so it didn't go to jail necessarily, but it stopped, the operation stopped. So Mr. Comey gets up and he discusses Hillary Clinton's email server. He sort of identifies each of the elements of the crime in order to satisfy violating 18 U.S.C. 793F. And then not only does he identify each of the elements of the crime, he gives examples of how she did it. And so for the first probably 13 minutes and 30 seconds of his briefing, it's actually right on the nose and quite devastating. And in the last 90 seconds, he says, well, never mind, no one would do anything about this, which is preposterous. He overstepped his bounds by making a call that really is the call of the Attorney General. And Loretta Lynch never really recused herself. She said that she would take whatever recommendation she was given. That's different than recusing, 2 different animals. But Mr. Comey punted, right? Here's some other things to consider. When Mrs. Clinton was interviewed on the 2nd of July, that Saturday before the briefing, my first question was it a rights warning environment? Meaning, was she Mirandized? That's the thing you remember from TV where the cops say, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you, et cetera, et cetera. It's very important to know whether she was Mirandized or not, because if she wasn't, then it was really just a coffee and donut session organized by Mrs. Clinton's attorneys, David Kendall and the cluster of people around him. So if it's a coffee and donut session, then she's not a suspect, then she's being interviewed as a cooperating witness. It changes the entire dynamic of the interview. If she was Mirandized, and really she should have been, and here's why she should have been. So if I'm a federal law enforcement officer, and I used to be in my past life, and I have reason to believe that you've committed a crime, I can't interview you without Mirandizing you. It's just a fact. Because I have the ability to apprehend you, right? It's a liberty interest. You no longer you have freedom of liberty. I'm going to apprehend you, place you in custody. And so I have to be able to Mirandize you because this is the point between a cooperating witness and a suspect or a subject. Everybody uses different terms depending upon what agency you're with. And so it's all important what happens on the 2nd of July. And it was very clear that Mrs. Clinton was not Mirandized, that it was a coffee and donut session arranged by David Kendall, that attorneys claiming to represent Mrs. Clinton, people like Cheryl Mills, had also been granted immunity and were sitting in the same room during the interview. This is extraordinary. I mean, this just doesn't happen. People aren't invited to, sit along during an interview of a crime. So, when that happened, I figured all the handwriting was on the wall. And regretfully, I was, one of those times where I was right, and I'm kind of glad that I was right. But boy, sometimes it stinks being right. I'd rather not be right. That's one sort of example where I came to you last March and I talked to you about all these things, and virtually every element of what I talked to you about and predicted came exactly true. So I'm glad that I was right, but gee, I wish I wasn't right. Let me talk to you about a couple of other topics that are in the news, and sort of hopefully, with the same mindset involved, right? This isn't a partisan issue in the sense of, Judicial Watch is truly nonpartisan. We're philosophically conservative, but we're nonpartisan in the sense that we never endorse political candidates or parties. Never. But we're philosophically conservative. So people say, well, how can you be that? So, well, just like the ACLU can be nonpartisan. I mean, obviously their philosophy comes from the left, but no one gets upset when they, make all sorts of pronouncements. So let me talk about a couple things that are in the news that I think are very important. You hear incessantly, Russia, 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 right? And this idea that somehow Russia was involved in the last campaign and the election. I got a little news for you. Russia's been involved in campaigns and elections since 1917, when it was the Soviet Union. And I mean that literally. People chuckle, but literally it's true. In 1917, right, with the workers and soldiers Soviets take over and the Tsar is knocked out, the Soviet Union has had a very active, what they call active measures campaign. That's their terminology. And active measures campaigns consist of propaganda, fake news, political manipulation, efforts to generate political unrest and confusion and turmoil. So all those are components. It's really an information operation. They're trying to influence another outside organization. Well, why do I say that, or how can that be true? Well, there used to be something called the Comintern, the Communist International, which was disbanded in 1943, supposedly. All it did was change its name. Right? It became a department of the KGB. But the Soviet Union and then Russia has been interested in influencing the United States for decades. I'll give you specific examples of how that's true. In 1933, FDR decided to diplomatically acknowledge or recognize the Soviet Union. So from 1917 to 1933, we had no diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union. None. We didn't recognize them as a legitimate government. A lot of people don't even know that. So in 1933 in November, FDR decides, okay, fine, we will recognize you and we'll give you full diplomatic, relations. He did that in part because he wanted the Comintern, the Communist International, to stop radicalizing unions in the United States. There was a real, not just political radicalizing, but even militancy, right? Actual armed, violent reactions and efforts by U.S. Unions. And FDR was interested in suppressing that because we were coming out of, or actually sort of moving through the Great Depression, right? And so you had the country coming out of, or at least in the middle of a depression. You had unions organizing and becoming increasingly militant. And the president knew that there was outside money, outside influence from Russia influencing these efforts. And so as part of the deal, it was, we'll acknowledge you and engage in diplomatic relations, but you got to lay off, calm down, stop. The guy who was the minister, who actually ended up becoming the first Russian or Soviet ambassador, was a guy named Lintonov. And Lintonov went back to the Soviet embassy. In his memoirs, he writes this: they laughed, they drank vodka and beer, and said, "We got it in the bag." So they viewed it as an enormous political victory because they finally got America to recognize them. So in 1943, 10 years later, FDR is still president. And of course, you know, everybody sort of forgets that in 1939, as Germany invaded east into Poland, who was invading west? The Soviet Union was invading Poland from the west, right? So they were allies at that point. Later on, they flip, and the Soviet Union, once Nazi Germany invades Russia, they flip and they join us. In 1943, the Russians want a lot of Dodge trucks, right? They want a lot of things from us that we can provide to them. And so, again, the Soviet Union agrees to dissolve the Comintern, the Communist International, in exchange for better relations with the United States. And you can delve into a lot of the relationships in the background and the influence campaign with people like Harry Hopkins, who's an advisor to the president, and any number of different folks who actively involved in espionage against the United States in the FDR White House. So people like Lachlan Curry, Harry Dexter White in the Treasury Department, of course, Mr. Hess, everyone knows, because they know about him from the days of the Pumpkin Papers a few years later in the 50s. So there's an enormous amount of intrigue and espionage and influence operations and active measures campaigns going on from the Soviet Union and Russia for decades and decades. So the notion that somehow, suddenly, in 2016, oh my God, the Russians are involved, it's really quite rich. I mean, it's just, it's preposterous. The other thing that's very amusing is that, you know, this is largely an argument coming from the political left, right? These are the people who were essentially allies of the Soviet Union in one form or another for decades. These are the people that if you mentioned outside influence of a political campaign, they would scream at you, you're a McCarthyite, right? And now all of a sudden they've discovered this, oh my goodness, there might be people. All right, so let's be clear about a few things. Did the Russians attempt to influence the election? Of course they did. They have, like I said, since 1917. Is there any evidence that they did so? None. It's been said repeatedly by all sorts of folks. Even folks that are not necessarily very friendly to Mr. Trump have all said, no, there's no evidence of influence whatsoever. Vladimir Putin did not somehow trick Hillary Clinton into not campaigning in Wisconsin and Michigan. All right? There was not some, you know, when Mrs. Clinton decided not to go to Wisconsin and Michigan, that was her choice. And so there's no influence there. Something else you hear, you'll see that Lieutenant General Flynn, Michael Flynn, who was the first National Security Advisor, unfortunately only lasted about 20 days. You know, he may have done something to upset the Vice President. I don't know what that is. I don't pretend to. But the notion, and I know Lieutenant General Flynn personally, the notion that somehow for about $45,000 for a speaking fee to go to a conference in Russia, that he could be bought for that is preposterous. Absolutely preposterous. I mean, if you want to see collusion, I will refer you to the New York Times article with the headline, Clinton cash flow to Clinton Foundation as Russian uranium deal sealed. All right, so if you want to see collusion with the Russians or with the Soviet Union, you need only look as far as the Clinton Foundation and Uranium One and all sorts of matters related to that. If you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to go Google that up and you know, read for yourself what was going on. So this thing you hear of Russia, Russia, Russia is nonsense in the sense that there's any active collusion or some sort of effort to really undermine our electoral system. No one was going in and pulling a lever or filling in a bubble or doing an electronic touchscreen saying, oh, yes, you know, we really got to get in line with Vladimir Putin. I mean, that just is preposterous. But it's used as another sort of information operation, or as another talking point, because it blurs and muddies things, right? And so you've got really a nasty, nasty political environment in Washington, D.C. Desperate people do desperate things. That's always been my experience. And so that's what we're faced with. The far, far greater threat to our democracy is the unmasking that's gone on. So let me talk about, we have this enormous signals intelligence capability, thank goodness, in our intelligence community, principally through the National Security Agency. So I know it's been exaggerated in some cases, but let me put the things in context for you. Virtually every electron that is communicated between people, businesses, or anything else is vacuumed up by the NSA. And that's a good thing, in my opinion. But virtually every electron, I don't care if it's, you talking to your cousin Martha or whatever, or it's business email or whatever it is, if it's out there bouncing around, it's being vacuumed up. 99.9% of it is irrelevant. Right? It's like mining for gold or panning for gold. You're going through tons of sand to get a few little nuggets. And for the large part, the government really doesn't give a damn what you're saying to your cousin Martha or whatever else. It just doesn't matter. But in order to be able to sort of consume or understand all the stuff that's out there, they need to look at virtually everything. Not look at in the sense of analyze, but just be able to kind of sort and sift. So that goes on every day. What doesn't go on every day is the National Security Advisor and sort of the ring around Susan Rice at the time, asking for specific communications traffic of certain persons and having their identities revealed. It just doesn't happen. No. All right? The only reason that's done is for political weaponizing of the national intelligence collection means. And so what you have is an effort, and this is not my words, others who have been interviewed who said, look, when we saw what was unmasked and looked at, it was essentially like gossip column stuff. It was like a private investigator going out and looking for dirt on a bad divorce or a business deal that has people partners fighting over something. And so this political weaponizing of the intelligence system, really to go after political opponents. The sad news is it's nothing new in the sense that you've seen the Obama administration weaponize the IRS, right? Last time I was here, I talked about how that worked, how the Internal Revenue Service was used to identify, install, and in some way really just monkey with or attack political opponents of the president. And there's many, many examples. In fact, we represent some folks who did have their files either manipulated or they're harassed incessantly. And so this is the next step, right? It's completely consistent and logical that if you're going to take the IRS and use it as a political weapon to go after your opponents, why wouldn't you use intelligence information gleaned from that? I don't see how there's any inconsistency in that. If you're willing to cross the line, well, why wouldn't you do it in another way? And so, we're faced with something that really, there's a lot of kind of loose rhetoric about, people love to invoke Watergate as being, kind of the benchmark political scandal and make reference to it. This, not just politicization of the IRS, but also of our principally signals intelligence collection capability nationally, Watergate pales in comparison. Pales. I'm not justifying it. I'm not excusing it. Watergate was wrong, illegal. There's no good to be found in it. But what we've seen so far, and frankly, we're due more answers, but what we've seen so far is very, very disturbing. And I would argue, there have been crimes that have been committed. And I say that again, not to be sort of, glib or as a cheap, political throwaway line. I've done this for a living, all right? I've conducted counterespionage investigations. I've conducted information security and other mishandling of classified information documents. in one instance, I can tell you that there was a lieutenant colonel serving at headquarters U.S. Army Europe when I commanded the counterintelligence detachment there in Heidelberg, and a very good guy who otherwise, was a star. He was a lieutenant colonel serving on the staff there of the SINC, the Commander-in-Chief U.S. Army Europe. I went into his office and physically removed him. Right, we took him out of the building because an otherwise really good guy who had had a great career and done good things mishandled the document, got nervous, freaked out, and instead of saying, "Okay, I did it," he lied about it, and that's where it starts to spiral, right? And he was a great guy with a great career and a wife and kids and all the other good things that you would expect, but he blew himself up, and he was done, right? Professionally done, finished. And so this is, so many times larger, bigger, much, much worse, much graver than this one instance I'm giving you with this one unfortunate lieutenant colonel. It really pales in comparison. So we have some very unpleasant things to go through as a country with respect to this unmasking scandal. It's not going to go away anytime soon. There are people who have been sort of smeared in the process. They have their own civil claims to bring for violations of the Privacy Act. Some of those cases are, I think, going to be big enough that they'll be granted discovery in those cases, in which case you'll have all sorts of characters very high in the Obama administration who will be subject to deposition, who there'll be document production that'll be required. There's some very interesting, it's not simply the criminal elements or the criminal aspect of the crimes that have been committed, mishandling defense information, but it's also the civil claims that private persons can bring because they've been dragged through the mud and information from government files has been leaked in an effort to smear them. So it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out. It's really quite extraordinary, and I don't think we've seen anything like it. I used to say that about the IRS because it was so extraordinary. The IRS gave the FBI 1.25 million taxpayer files to kind of browse through to see if there's anything interesting in it. You want to know why there were no criminal prosecutions concerning the IRS scandal? Well, because the FBI was complicit, right? There's IRS files, and I forget the exact nomenclature. I want to say 6130, but I may be wrong. They refer to them in shorthand by a paragraph of the law. It's taxpayer information. And that taxpayer information can't just be kind of handed around. It's guarded, probably better than classified information, frankly. But for political purposes, Lois Lerner had meetings with the Justice Department and said, look, we want to give you guys some files and see what you can find in them. Maybe there's some prosecutions that are kind of percolating out there. Because they wanted to, and this is Lois Lerner's language, wanted to make an example of some people. And so they literally transferred 1.25 million FBI or IRS taxpayer files to the FBI. Nobody knows this. I mean, it's public, but no one pays attention to it. It's always disturbed me. And so the FBI has dirty fingers on this one, right? Because they were complicit. They went along with it. So why do you think there was no criminal prosecutions? There can't be, right? Do you think the FBI is going to sign up and say, yeah, by the way, we participated in this? And no. It's the standard refrain of deny, 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 right? And then the last thing I want to touch on, and then we'll go to questions. And I mean, there's so much to talk about. I could go on and on for hours, and I don't want to do that. But I do want to touch on one other thing that I think is particularly important. This is, I came to you today, I got in yesterday from El Paso, Texas, where I've spent the last 6 years doing very long investigations about all sorts of corruption. There's a very good documentary movie we did a couple of years back called The Sun City Cell, and I encourage you to view that. It's a 48-minute long documentary that talks about a narco-terrorism ring out of El Paso that in 2009 had targeted for truck bombing the Sears Tower, which I guess is now the Willis Tower, and Oprah Winfrey's studios. Sometimes people applaud at that point. But it was a very serious bomb plot run out of El Paso by militant Islamists. It was headed up by a guy named Adnan al-Shukr Juma. Shukr Juma was the head of North American operations for Al-Qaeda. He flew into and out of the United States from an airstrip in New Mexico called Cielo Dorado, which is a private airstrip community. You have them here in Florida, but this one's on the New Mexican border. So it's a very interesting documentary. I think you'll enjoy it. If you go to our YouTube page at Judicial Watch, you can find it there. But having just come to you from El Paso and with what I just said in mind, I want you to think about what is the greatest threat to average, ordinary American citizens, whether it's here in Florida or Ohio or Iowa or Montana or wherever. What is the single greatest threat to the average American citizen? Is it ISIS or is it Mexican drug cartel heroin? What's the greatest threat? Heroin by far. And it's interesting because I asked that question in different places where I talk, and some people, ISIS, they're going to get... No. I mean, obviously ISIS is a threat. I'm not discounting it. I'm not saying it isn't. But the everyday American, the average person, the greatest threat is heroin by far. So I was out, I can't reveal exactly who it was, but I was speaking with a toxicologist working for a coroner's office in a major American city in the Midwest 2 weeks ago. And the toxicologist told me all the bodies in our morgue right now that we're doing autopsies on for heroin overdose, we say heroin overdose, but it really isn't heroin that kills them. What is it? Fentanyl and fentanyl derivatives or variations. And so it's carfentanil, which is literally elephant tranquilizer. They're cutting heroin with fentanyl and all these different, there's farfentanil, carfentanil, there's all these different, you change one molecule, you have essentially the same drug, but it's a different variation of it. And some of them are listed as Schedule II drugs that the DEA pursues, and others are not. A huge amount of the fentanyl coming into the United States right now, the illicit fentanyl coming into the United States, and certainly fentanyl has an entirely appropriate use, right? It's used for legitimate pain management purposes, surgeries. Late-stage cancer patients are often, prescribed it. So there's a legitimate use for it, but it's also been wildly abused. There's a very interesting book called Dreamland by a guy named John Quinones that I recommend to you to understand how we got to where we are now with respect to opioids. But the heroin epidemic in this country, the Commonwealth of Virginia, where I live, has declared the heroin epidemic to be a state health emergency. Other states have done the same thing, places like Ohio and New Hampshire. This is grave, grave stuff. And I'm willing to say, no show of hands, but I'm willing to say that in this room, any number of folks, probably a majority of folks, either through friends, family, some kind of relation, there is some addiction problem, right? Whether it's booze, drugs, whatever it is, somebody knows somebody who's like, oh, it's a shame. So-and-so is a bright, young, smart, whatever, and now, boom, right? So there's some very sad stories out there. There are some great stories, though, of recovery. People turn their lives around. So it isn't all doom and gloom. But the opioids have an incredible hold on people, right? There are people in the addiction and recovery world who say that, it as a substance, the abuse of it is probably one of the more difficult, if not the most difficult thing to break or to work through in recovery. So it's a grave threat to the country. It touches or affects almost every family. When I mentioned before, somebody knows somebody, either family or friend, all these heads went around the room as I said that, right? There's some connection. It's enormously corrosive to our society. There are long-term consequences to this that we don't think about, and we need to. I talk about political scandals, and that'll all sort itself out. Frankly, on the grand scheme of things, I can give you historical examples of how we've been in far graver positions. We're not involved in a violent civil shooting, civil war. There's all sorts of things that we've gone through that are much more dangerous. What we haven't gone through before is this heroin epidemic that we're realizing in the country now. So let me give you an example. I'll put it in numbers for you. 18,000 reported heroin overdoses in the last year. Excuse me, go back to 2015. They're always a year behind in their reporting numbers. So in 2015, 18,000 reported, that's different than real numbers, right? Reported heroin overdose deaths. So in 1 year, so let's translate that. That's 6 9/11s, right? In 1 year. If you figure 3,000 at a clip, right? This is serious, serious stuff. If you look at our neighbors to the south in Mexico, the cartels are incredibly violent. People get all excited about ISIS chopping heads off and burning people alive. They've been doing that in Mexico for the last 15 years. Go on the internet and Google up Mexican cartels beheadings or Mexican cartel, attacks or deaths, and just click on images and see what pops up. It is horrifying. This has been going on across our southern border for more than a decade. Yawn. No one pays attention. There's virtually no news coverage of it. I don't think there's enough reporters, frankly, with enough guts to report on it. It is horrific. If you take a 100-mile band into Mexico, right, so trace our border from Texas over to California and go 100 miles deep into Mexico, there's been 35,000, and that's a low number, 35,000 dead Mexicans in the last 10 years for cartel-related deaths. The level of violence is unbelievable, and it gets virtually no reporting. It's really disgraceful. So the problem is there's a bleed-over effect, right? And here's the really unpleasant thing that no one likes when I say this, but unfortunately it's true. I'll give you, here's something to think about. All right? Does Walmart ever run out of milk? No, Walmart never runs out of milk. Never. They have a very sophisticated delivery system, right? Their distribution and delivery is, talk about having it down to a science, right? We never run out of heroin. The only way that the amount of heroin that we have in this country gets to where it is because of corrupt law enforcement. No one likes me to say that. They're like, what do you mean? I'm just telling you, you don't move that much product across the border. It's physically moved, right? It doesn't just appear out of midair. Fentanyl, carfentanil, all those things, you can work that up in a lab right here, just like meth, right? That can be cooked up here. 95% of the heroin in this country comes from Sinaloa, Mexico. 95%. The only way it gets across that border is through corrupt law enforcement. And when I say law enforcement, I mean Customs and Border Protection, I mean county sheriffs, I mean district attorneys. And it's everything from sort of passive corruption of, oh, I think I'll get coffee now, and somebody just turns a blind eye, to active cooperating conspiracy. There's too much money on the table, right? There's $18 to $20 billion at least being trafficked with Mexican drug cartels. We can't ignore this, right? I know everyone gets, everyone's got their favorite topic that they want to talk about with respect to corruption. But the threat posed by Mexican drug heroin and then all the fentanyl, carfentanil, all the other stuff they're cutting it with is very, very grave. It's corrosive to our society. It will tear us up in ways we haven't even imagined. It's sort of like unanticipated consequences of things. Much like PTSD and traumatic brain injury with respect to veterans coming back from our last 15, 16 years of war. There's long-term consequences of that. This is exponentially larger than that. And there's not a lot of discussion of it. There really isn't. Just 2 days ago, a new variation of laced or cut heroin called Gray Death. That's what it's called. That's another fun one. Go Google up Gray Death. Made its first appearance in Indiana. And that's, again, a case of carfentanil being cut with heroin. And you're seeing little towns who don't have the capacity to deal with it having to react to overdoses. And so little Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, in the lower southwest corner of Pennsylvania, kind of where West Virginia and Ohio and Pennsylvania all come together, in one weekend had something like 47 overdoses. How do you have 47 overdoses in a little community like that? Well, one load comes in that gets cut, and whatever they're cutting it with and how much you're putting into it, people are shooting up. Opioids start out as, oh yeah, I'm going to take pills. And then the pills become, well, I need more pills. And maybe a doc abuses his prescription authority. Maybe the person gets desperate and goes to buy it. But I'm telling you, there's towns in Ohio where you can just drive slowly with your hand out the window, and that's the signal, right? Just drive slowly through a bad part of town with your hand out the window. And just keep making right turns, right, around the block. And eventually someone will walk up to you. It's that tough, right? That's how it works. So I'm going to stop there. I've thrown out all kinds of stuff that will make your day. I did this same talk, or one very similar to it, in Atlanta to the Federalist Society chapter in Atlanta, and it was, I guess, 2 days. It was Thursday, and Sunday was Easter, so I closed with "Happy Easter, everybody!" Right? It's kind of a bummer, but these are all very serious, important things that we need to talk about, and I'm happy to take any of your questions now. Yes, sir.
Building the wall, will that stop some of the heroin?
To some degree, it will. It's not a panacea, but physical impediments contribute to. There's the actual physical impediment of a barrier, and then there's sort of all the. It's almost like an active measures campaign, right? There's all the information and policy and attitude that comes with that. So I know that walls work beautifully, right? I spent a long time sitting on the East-West German border, watching East Germans machine gun people trying to flee their country, right? And there's people that will disingenuously say, well, see, that's a wall. You're trying to... No. A totalitarian government that is imprisoning its people and killing them when they try to leave is not the same thing as a wall stopping people from coming here looking for a job, right? They're two philosophically very different things. But there's this disingenuous attempt to say, well, that's what you're trying to do in the United States. You're trying to put... No. So the wall will have merit in the sense that it's a physical barrier, making it more difficult to cross from one place to another. It won't solve everything because in large part, a lot of the heroin that I'm talking about moves on trucks across the border. Last time I was here, I talked about agribusiness and a pecan operation outside of El Paso. And there's no machine that can shell a pecan. So all the pecans in the country are bagged up, or at least in Texas. So if you think about citrus in Florida, think pecans in Texas, right? Same thing. So they take 2,000-pound bags of unshelled pecans, bring them into Mexico. All the handwork is done. The 2,000 pounds of pecans are bagged back up and then moved back across. And so from November to April, every year, thousands of trucks go back and forth into Mexico to Texas. And they're bringing pecans back and forth. I mean, it's agribusiness. It's huge, big business, right? What do you think you can move in those 2,000-pound bags? Anything you want. Drugs, money, people, weapons. It doesn't make a difference. It's just, and people say, well, how can that be? Well, I mean, it's moving contraband. You want to get something from point A to point B, what's it worth to you? And if you're willing to pay the price, okay. That's how it's done. So a wall's not a panacea. It doesn't fix everything, but it slows things down. It allows checkpoints to actually operate as checkpoints. Will there be efforts to tunnel under the wall? Sure. Go over it? Yep. I have no doubt. But it is a positive step in the right direction. Yes, sir.
What's being done to curb American use of this? That's the real answer.
Yeah, I agree with you. If we're the market, right? And we keep paying and paying and paying, right? And well, in large part, yeah. Of course,
These aren't helping. They're promoting it every day.
that's why I encourage you to read Dreamland by John Quinones, because he describes both the licit and the illicit abuse of opioids and how, there was the legit, lawful, you cannot say whether it's morally correct or not, right? Just because something's legal doesn't mean you should do it. So there's this abuse of opioids by the pharmaceutical industry and frankly also medical professionals that drove or created a level of addiction because of overprescribing and overuse. The United States consumes 85% of all the natural and synthetic opioids in the world.
So you can never build a wall high.
Well, that isn't the issue. That's a false argument, right? I mean, it's like saying, well, you can never. That's akin to the when did you stop beating your wife question. I'm not saying that a taller wall will stop opioids. I mean, it's a false argument. So what I am saying is that opioids have been abused through prescription and legal means, through the medical and pharmaceutical world. But eventually that dries up, and where do people go? They go to a spoon and a needle, right? And you can say, well, that shouldn't happen. Well, that's true. How many people die from DWI crashes, right? So you can get in sort of a vicious circle argument about it. I think the greatest problem, there's two things that should be done. Number one, we've declared this war on drugs that is a phony war on drugs. It's a half-hearted cat and mouse game, right? It isn't really prosecuted like a war on drugs. I mean war like capital W war, right? It's not. It's all lip service and sound bites. So if there was really a war on drugs, capital W war, if politicians and law enforcement made a decision to create essentially what we used to call in the military denied areas, you cannot function in this area. If you come into the city, you're done, right? If we created areas that really were denied areas legally, and then I think with the cooperation, or at least with the, I'll just say cooperation, with the cooperation of the Mexican government, if we were to declare drug cartels in Mexico foreign terrorist organizations. Right now, they're classified as transnational criminal organizations, and these titles matter. Legally, they matter. So transnational criminal organizations is one thing, but if we were to declare them foreign terrorist organizations, and arguably they meet the definition to a T, if you go through and look at each of the little subparagraphs of what the law says, they are foreign terrorist organizations. Then you open up some possibilities both militarily and through intelligence means to go after them. The problem is we would have to have the cooperation of the Mexican government. I think they'd be reticent. They have domestic political problems that would put the Mexican politicians in a very tough spot. But we may have to do for them what they cannot do for themselves, right? We may have to do that at some point. So, I mean, I would advocate that we do declare them foreign terrorist organizations and treat them that way. And I think that, militarily disrupting their operations would go a long way to sort of changing the dynamics of what we have to face as a country. Will it fix it? No. Will it greatly degrade it? Yes.
We have two addictions, drugs and money.
Absolutely.
Fight that.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, sir.
What can we do as individuals to help, I guess, promote the stopping of corruption or in government in general?
Yeah, it's your individual activity, right? It's your commitment to participating and asking unpleasant questions and showing up at county council meetings. And the greatest thing that can be done is individual participation. It's my contention, I'm not saying that this county in particular, but any given county in the country is probably the most corrupt element or unit of government, because millions of dollars are shot through county governments with little or no supervision. Hypothetical, not here, but any place, you could say, look, they have these county council meetings that no one watches. It's on cable access channel 23 at 2 in the morning. Very few people show up to the meetings. They're moving millions of dollars around for paving, for sewer systems, for water, and nobody really knows what the hell's going on and who's getting what contract. It's a narrow circle of people who are in that business who look at it. It's sort of a hothouse of the same people, running things. But the greatest thing that you can do is not be a bystander, but be a participant. That is the greatest thing you can do. I'm going to this side of the room. Yes, sir.
Getting back to the political scene, you mentioned you had a low opinion of Tony,
Yes.
and that you were personally familiar with General Flynn.
Yeah.
I wonder if you would share your views on both those fellows.
Yeah, I think I don't know what General Flynn did with respect to the vice president, but obviously it was bad enough to get him canned. And I can't explain it beyond that. I just know what you know from headlines where he either said something that wasn't true or said something that was mostly true but not 100% true. I don't know. I mean, but clearly something got crosswired. I know Lieutenant General Flynn, as an intelligence officer, is brilliant. He is a no-nonsense, direct, straight-up, honest, good guy. I think that there was a political calculus made, and there was tension in the White House, and he was told, thanks, but no thanks. But the notion that somehow, Flynn is going to, would sell out the United States, it's absolutely preposterous. There's no way in hell. So there's people that want to turn him into a boogeyman, or he's responsible for X, Y, and Z, or he was, like I said, for $45,000, supposedly he was, influenced by the Russians. It's baloney. It's not even possible. With respect to Comey, Comey loves Comey. He's at the point where he believes his own press releases, right? He surrounded himself, I think, with a circle of sycophants who were just, all hail Comey and he could do no wrong. And he started to believe his own nonsense, right? And I don't doubt he was put in a tough position. I'm not saying he wasn't, but he made poor decisions and then he compounded the poor decisions. And the Hillary Clinton email case was a throwaway. It was an abomination. I know active and recently retired FBI agents who are personal contacts and friends of mine, and they said the level of disgust in the FBI was palpable. I mean, their view of him, one guy told me this. He says, to cut to the chase, here's the story. We think, this is the FBI agent I know, we think he's a dirty cop. That's the feeling. Do they mean that literally? No. But he conveyed to me that the sense, the emotion behind how this whole thing played out was akin to a dirty cop mentality. And he lost, a lot of rank and file FBI guys just had lost faith in him.
Was there any opportunity where you could ignite that investigation?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I mean, there's sufficient grounds to say that it wasn't done right the first time, that it should really get a de novo, a completely new review.
But they gave, I think they gave immunity to several of Hillary Clinton's aides, included Uma.
Sure, absolutely. That presumes that they told the truth, though. If they didn't tell the truth, bye-bye immunity.
Yeah, one other thing. Isn't it true that Comey did not even attend the interrogation and so forth of Clinton after July?
That is correct. He did not participate in the 2nd of July interview. There were at least 5 grants of immunity, perhaps 8. Not a single subpoena was issued. I mean, it's no prosecutions. Yet, like I said, if you listen to that briefing on the 5th of July, he identifies each of the elements of the crime and how all of them were satisfied. This thing about intent is baloney. Mishandling national defense information does not require intent. It's one of the few crimes that doesn't require intent. The fact that it occurred is the harm to the United States. So you do not need to prove intent. If you hear anybody discussing intent, it's absolute garbage. They're manufacturing a requirement that does not exist in the law. It's rare in that sense, but it is true. There's no requirement for intent. Yes, sir.
Well, first, I think it's incredibly encouraging you talk about the opiate crisis. I work in a drug and alcohol facility down here that helps combat that. And I know that Governor Scott last week declared a public health crisis
Good.
in Florida. Because I think there was like 500 since January, over 500 overdoses, and there's like 15 deaths a week or deadly overdoses in Palm Beach County.
Right.
Absolutely staggering numbers. So I wanted to thank you for that. And secondly, you didn't really speak on it, but kind of the hot topic that I'm seeing that a lot of people are picking up is this whole net neutrality thing. Can you speak at all to what you're seeing out there in regards to that?
Yeah, I'll touch on it briefly. I teach as an adjunct at George Mason University a journalism law class, and this comes up in the context of that. Net neutrality, the title, I mean, it's good branding. It sounds wonderful. It's very dangerous. It's really an attempt to constrain and filter and kind of the name sounds like net neutrality. Sure, everything's neutral and even, and it's not. It's an attempt to really constrain and manipulate internet services. And so I really don't have enough current facts about what the state of affairs are. I know that it's a misnomer and that it's dangerous, but I would encourage you to do your own research there. I'm going to go over to, yes, ma'am.
This is relative to MoveOn.org. What really impressed in my mind was how many thousands of people in front of the White House. There was the Democratic Party spewing more hatred, and they're just wild. And they had a number of demonstrations throughout the country. I looked at that and I thought, all we need were about 50 AK-47s, and they would have taken. They would have taken. No, if they had AK-47s, they'd take over the White House. They'd assassinate the president. And what are we going to do? What is being done?
Well, I don't agree with your assessment. I think I think it's factually incorrect, and I understand your sentiment, but you're allowed to protest like anybody else is, and they all have First Amendment rights, and they can choose to express them as they wish to, as long as they don't violate the law. And when they violate the law and engage in activities that are harmful to persons or property, then they're arrested. And they were in large numbers. Shortly after the inauguration, there were all sorts of lunatics running around Washington. I guess the great strike, the great act against the man, was breaking a Starbucks window or whatever it was. If that's their expression of their articulation of their frustration, okay, but they'll also go to jail for it.
My fear is that they won't stop there.
Well, all kinds of fears out there. There's very real things that I can give you that'll be much more fearsome than the potential of what might be. There are facts here and now that are more dangerous. Yes, sir.
What's your status on the Hillary deposition? And then why is the person who's at the center of everything, being Uma, just seems to get a free pass in terms of all the misapplication of the
Yeah, absolutely. So we're the only people outside of Congress. We're the only people to get Hillary Clinton under oath. Not even the FBI got her under oath. So we got her under oath in a court-ordered declaration that she had to make concerning how she handled her email. And then we were granted discovery in our litigation to get Hillary Clinton emails. And we took the deposition of 7 of her associates, people like Cheryl Mills and Huma Abedin. We deposed them. All their transcripts are on our website. You can read it for yourself. And then because it was still the middle of the election, Judge Emmett Sullivan, who ironically was appointed by Mrs. Clinton's husband, Judge Emmett Sullivan said, you can't depose her, but you can give her written interrogatories. And so we gave her, I forget how many questions, I think 25 questions is the local rule in D.C. So we gave her 25 questions, and they were compound questions, right? They were paragraphs long. But we posed questions that she answered under oath, obviously carefully wordsmithed by David Kendall and company. But there are statements under oath. Now, we went back and said, we don't think her answers are satisfactory. She either deliberately avoided or her answer was a non-answer. And so we've asked for the ability to depose her, and Judge Sullivan hasn't ruled on that yet. So, but yeah, we're the only people in the country to ever get her under oath. She was in the same boat, as is Cheryl Mills. They were, less than forthcoming, and you can demonstrate, and we have demonstrated. We've taken public statements, our deposition, other reporting, the documents themselves. So when you line them all up, in many cases they do match one for one, but there are any number of instances where they're, not quite lined up. And so in those instances where they either contradict or there's gaps, we go back and point that out to the judge and say, look, we need to have a fuller explanation of this because it doesn't line up.
The last situation, 1,000 emails that end up on her husband's.
Yeah, well, and of course all that is, here's the other good thing. The New York office of the FBI is not like FBI headquarters, right? the New York office of the FBI is sort of contaminated with New York thinking, right? And as a former New Yorker, and I'm here in the 6th borough, you can appreciate that the New York guys have a little different approach to things. And so NYPD in New York, when they were going after Anthony Weiner and the weirdness with him sexting the teenage girl, that whole bizarre thing, that's what gave them access to that laptop, which is what really opened the door to, hey, look, there's other emails here, right? And the New York office of the FBI and NYPD detectives wouldn't let that go. And I don't know for certain, but I have reason to believe that there was an effort in Washington to push that down. They didn't want to have it. And the New York guys are like, nah, we're not going to let it go. And either you investigate it or continue to investigate it, or, who knows, it might even be a leak to the New York Post. Can you imagine? So, because they weren't going to let it go because they were disgusted by the whole thing. They were disgusted by Weiner and all of his weirdness. They were disgusted by what was going on with the email server. They just weren't going to stand by and watch it. Yes, sir.
Sort of continuing on Maxine's question about the protests. One of the things that sort of surprised me after Trump set up his first travel ban was how quickly protests were organized and how easily people were moved that shouldn't have been able to afford to all get to the airports and protest so quickly.
Yeah.
And one of the going things is that someone with a lot of money organized these protests. And so, a couple of people whispered, Mr. Soros' name. And so I was wondering if there was any, what Judicial Watch's take is on how involved Soros actually is in this sort of thing, what sort of legal or real, factual or, provable sort of links are there.
Yeah, there's any number of them. I mean, and in cases where there have been public protests resulting in arrest or where people have filed for permits to conduct protests, we've sought records to identify those organizations that were organizing, right? And inevitably, there may not be a solid line connecting Soros and the groups, but there's almost always a dashed or dotted line. And so, there's an arm's length sort of filtering of, you're not going to find a cash payment, with a receipt necessarily, but you're going to find people that operate in the same circles, who are sort of philosophically aligned, and groups and foundations that are willing to fund people to do those sorts of things. There's an interesting movement in a couple of cities by some law enforcement people, and then law enforcement associations, right? So like police unions or other law enforcement associations where they're trying to draft legislation, and this is kind of city to city, each one's different, where they're going to say, when they make arrests at these sorts of protests, particularly when they turn violent, right? That's when you can run around and scream with a sign as much as you want, have fun. But when you start attacking people and destroying property, that changes the game completely. So in instances where that occurs and police make arrests, there are some municipalities who are looking at, okay, we've arrested you. Are you from here? So are you a resident of the state? Are you a resident of the county or the city? And if you're not, additional measures. So it's instead of just, riot, it's malicious, right? You crank it up a notch. And so instead of being a misdemeanor, now it's a felony. And they're doing that because, first of all, look, the police department that's, in city X, they're resourced, funded, paid, trained. They operate as the police force for the city. When you bring in 5,000 people from outside the jurisdiction, you're generating a level of policing that they're not financed for, trained for, et cetera. And so if you're going to do that, well, then the police have the ability to come back and say, well, you can exercise your First Amendment rights, but once you went over the line and became violent to persons or damaged property, if you're not from here, then there's sort of malice aforethought, right? You made a willful decision. You have free will and intellect, and you exercise them in a way to come here to create additional damage. And so they want to treat it as a much more grave crime. And so I think that's a very interesting thing to watch because there's certain municipalities and law enforcement associations who are looking at sort of upping the game there. And it's like, you're free to protest as much as you want, but once you go over the line, I mean, this is not a sport, right? And we're not equipped to do this. And there have to be consequences. And so I think that's an interesting look or view as to how to pursue or prosecute these cases. Look for these sort of professional, paid, out-of-town disruptors, right, who are there to generate they're hoodlums. I mean, this is not we're angry and we want to have our voices heard. This is, we're a half step away from insurrection, right? So, yes, sir.
I wonder if you would share with us your thoughts on the current movement to try to shut down sanctuary cities.
Yeah, it can't be done fast enough. I mean, seriously, I mean, you have instances where various municipalities, San Francisco is probably the most, known one because of Kate Steinle, where municipalities have openly not just not cooperated, but worked against law enforcement for people who are unlawfully present. And, you can have a debate up and back and forth about what our immigration policies should be, and that's great, have at it. But the current law says that if you're unlawfully present, you're subject to federal detention and until an immigration judge can figure out your status and what to do with you. And you have different police agencies around the country, particularly in larger cities, that are doing all they can to thwart that. Now, the phony line that's given is that, well, we can't have good policing in the community unless we have people that trust us and know that right? We won't get in trouble. And I have talked to innumerable police officers at all sorts of levels in different jurisdictions who've told me, look, if there's been a violent assault or there's been a robbery or the first question, in fact, the 50th question the police officer is asking has nothing to do with immigration status. It has to do with, okay, what happened? Who, what, when, where, how, and why, right? They're trying to answer all the basic interrogatives to find the bad guys, to arrest them. They're not worried about immigration status. It is not even part of the questioning. People will use that as, we got to build trust and we won't have trust. At that level, when you're dealing with a crisis that's immediately right at hand in front of you, no one's immigration status is not a question that's on the table. Now, once an apprehension's been made and somebody's sitting in jail and you're trying to review, well, who is this guy? First of all, we're trying to identify him for real. Who really is he, right? Because often there's multiple IDs involved or pseudonyms. Who really is this guy? Well, then you're going to start digging around to see who this guy is. But no one's going after the victim. They're looking at the bad guy, the perpetrator, to determine who he is and if he has other outstanding warrants. And that's what people get upset about. And, it's there's got to be consequences. What other law do we not want to follow? Right? Are we going to have a murder sanctuary? Right? Unfortunately, that thinking goes that way, right? You end up with a Swiss version of the Zurich's Needle Park. Well, let's just legalize it. Let's just let it go. That's why I talk about, violations of law being corrosive to society. There's an example. Ask Kate Steinle's family about how they feel about it.
Chris?
I'll be quiet now.
Normally we try to be done by quarter.
By noon.
If you're willing to still...
I'll hang around.
Question,
yeah,
okay.
I'll hang around.
But please recognize some people may have to leave. By the way, obviously we would love to see you support Judicial Watch. Secondly, we need anybody who's either been a member and wants to renew, but we welcome that. We do have a couple of applications to join. For anybody that'd like to join the business group, you can see we have some interesting things going on from what you've heard about. You got a whole slew of guys here that are all major guys in alternative medicine as well that can contribute as well. So you're welcome to stay, obviously, and keep asking questions. If you have to leave, we understand. Please give your support.
And see my friend Angel.
Yeah.
My friend Angel can hook you up. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have apprehension about any of the appointees that Trump has appointed? And secondly, what do you feel the philosophy of this administration is easier for you or harder?
Okay, so apprehension. I guess if I had apprehension, it would be concerning Rick Perry. And the reason I say that is because one thing is amusing is I think President Trump at one point before one of the debates said he wanted to have Perry take an IQ test before he was allowed to debate. I thought that was kind of amusing. The other thing is Perry advocated for the dissolution of the Energy Department. Now he's the secretary of it. So there's a certain inconsistency in that, right? So, I just, that's a tough one to, it makes sense. He's a Texas guy, oil, energy, I get it, right? I'm not, but there's a little tension there that I just think it's kind of amusing. And then what I really find interesting is, we're litigating all these cases, many concerning Freedom of Information Act. And that law allows the executive branch, whoever the secretary is, they have discretionary authority to release stuff. And what we see is a Justice Department where Sessions is at the head, and obviously he has a deputy, but then the entire sort of body of the Justice Department are sort of like legions of Sally Yateses. There's an embedded professional political class in Washington, D.C. that are long-term, many of them are political operatives, frankly, who've converted over time their political appointee positions to full-time civil servant positions. If you look at the voting demographics around Washington, D.C., in the city of Washington, 94% voted for Hillary Clinton. In Prince George's County, 89%. In Arlington County, across the river in Virginia, it's like 87%. That's the workforce, right? Those are the people who get up every morning and head out the door and go man their government office. So the sort of professional political, or the professional governmental staff are politicized in a way that is distinctly to the left. And when you bring in an outside, independent, non-politician businessman, and he becomes president, and he brings in all of his people with him, there's some political operatives in there, obviously people like Reince Priebus, right? He's a professional. But there's other people in there who have zero past government experience. And they come into positions of authority as secretaries or other senior guys, and their entire staff is in direct opposition to them. And they will do that either actively, in the sense of, I know for a fact, because I have a friend who is in the embassy staff in Mexico City, our U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, the staff in the embassy were bragging about how they're going to do everything they possibly could to sabotage President Trump. They were laughing and joking about it in the hallways of the embassy. I can give you names. I won't. Yeah. So you have, and these are career government employees, not political people, and the embassy staff was proudly proclaiming how they're going to try to sabotage the president. So, I mean, that's the fact of what you have to deal with. And so you can have all sorts of policies and ideas, but you can have a staff underneath you, the actual manpower that is operating adverse to your interests. It's a tough one to crack. Yes, sir.
Speaking of George Soros, back in 2009, 2010, Obama pledged $1 billion to Metro Brazil, of which George Soros was the majority owner, one of the major.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us some more information on that?
Well, I mean, all I really know is that it was essentially for offshore drilling in Brazil, which is exactly what they were supposedly reacting to when it comes to BP off the coast of Louisiana, right? And of course, part of the problem really overall is that you're asking oil companies to conduct operations basically at the level of science fiction, right? You're having them drill for oil, 2 miles beneath the surface, and you're creating a sort of a technical problem or a challenges for them that makes the extraction of oil that much more difficult. And why the president would obstruct or would at least make it more difficult for American companies near the United States to get oil, and then go ahead and give $1 billion to Brazil and their nationalized oil company to try to extract oil. And no one points out the inconsistency, right? This is like the Hollywood celebrities who are all for alternative energy and global warming and climate change, and they fly in on their private jet, right? The hypocrisy here is extraordinary. And so you can't have it both ways. Either you're really for something and you want to support it, or you're not. And you can't play, this is talking at both sides of your mouth at once.
Creates a much larger income stream.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of people with interests, right? And then somebody would come back and say, well, Farrell, listen, you're talking about American oil companies and they just want to exploit it. I mean, everyone's got an angle, and to think that they don't is naive. I'm just saying, if you're going to discuss the topic, well, let's put all the cards on the table. Let's actually discuss all the different options that are out there. So you're going to give Brazil $1 billion to do deep sea oil drilling. You're going to force American companies to conduct essentially science fiction drilling, right? Stuff that no one can even imagine them doing. And we're going to penalize the American company, but we're going to subsidize the Brazilian company. Well, let's discuss all those facts and not just create these phony, oh no, this is one way and this is the other. Cognitive dissonance. We're going to believe opposite things at the same time. It's disingenuous, and it's misleading to the American citizen and taxpayer. Very misleading. Yes, sir.
What do you personally believe the probability of Hillary being imprisoned
Imprisoned? Virtually zero. If I had to predict, I'll break out my crystal ball. I'll give you a prediction. Here's my prediction. There will be a second or follow-on sort of review investigation of Mrs. Clinton and the whole server thing. And it'll be conducted by some deputy attorney general in the normal course of affairs, right? There's a completely legitimate reason to point at that investigation and say it was screwed up and it probably needs a review. And so in the normal course of business, doing all the normal regular order, nothing extraordinary, just a regular order review of the case, with FBI as the investigative arm doing the same thing, there will be sufficient grounds to indict her. If I had to guess or predict, I'd say sometime in 2018, maybe 2019, there will be an indictment. And then President Trump will preemptively pardon her. That's my prediction. And the reason I say that is because it accomplishes the accountability aspect of let's get all the information, let's conduct a real investigation, let's prove that there are sufficient grounds to do something. But the president will then decide to be very magnanimous and sort of healing and cooperative, and then he'll say, look, we have all the facts. Everyone knows that there was something horrible done here. There was grave national security crime, and then just let it go. And that has King Solomon stuff, right? He's going to split the baby. He's going to figure out a way to get the facts established and at the same time not turn it into a all-out war of, political, and he'll appear magnanimous and, that's my guess. So we'll see what happens. I don't know, but all I'm saying is that if I had to predict, I'll invite me back in 2020 and we'll see if I'm right like I was on Comey. Yes, ma'am.
What's your prediction of Trump's future?
Here's one thing I can do. If the House changes hands in 2018 and it's a Democratic House, you will see nothing but impeachment from 2018 all the way through 2020. It is the only course of business the House will conduct. Now, whether it's true or not, or whether that doesn't matter, right? The legitimacy of the claim or the facts or the circumstance, none of that matters. For political purposes, the refrain will be impeach until the next election. So.
What's your thoughts about conflict of interest for the president?
I think that he's in a unique position. Most conflict of interest laws are written for really professional politicians. People like Daschle, right? The senator originally from South Dakota, whereas wife was an aviation lobbyist, and so he leaves government, and then so it's really sort of the professional government operative person, either appointed or elected, and he's in and out of government, and he has corporate either investments or positions or those sorts of things. Kind of like a Dick Cheney is a good example. He walked away purportedly from Halliburton, but he was still receiving money from Halliburton as vice president. And that money was because of ownership and investments and those sorts of things. So can you say, was he benefiting? Of course he was. So there was tension there. Trump is Trump, right? So Trump, he's a brand. How does he stop being Trump? across the canal over here, you've got the tower, right? I mean, and the notion that he would be able to divest himself of everything is preposterous. This guy owns all these properties and buildings and resorts. You don't sell it. It isn't like stock where you can have a sell order. So the notion that somehow he's going to, have no financial interest whatsoever, it's preposterous. I think he's gone a long way towards extracting himself from decision making. But the other part of it is it's a family business. So he's not supposed to talk to his kids. I think they have to be careful about it. I think he's gone a long way in a very unique circumstance. He doesn't fit the mold of the law the way it's written for the average person. So I think he's gone in the right direction. Is it perfect? No. Will anybody ever be satisfied? No. So I think the greatest thing is over time, we'll have to watch conduct and behavior, right? I think that he's laid out through his attorneys this disassociation or disconnect. And the only thing is to be watchful, to keep an eye on it. We tracked all of Obama's travel and all of the travel expenses. And you know what we're doing with Trump? Same damn thing. We're not picking favorites. It's behavior and conduct. If you're doing something that's illegal, immoral, or fattening, we're gonna look at it and prosecute it and push it. And so just like we tracked all of Obama's travel expenses, we're tracking all of Trump's travel expenses. And we'll get all the records and we'll put them online and make them available. Just like we take the financial disclosure forms of every federal judge in the country and make them available online. You can imagine how popular we are for doing that. But we do. We take every one. The judges are allowed to make redactions because, for example, let's say I'm a judge. Great. My wife is a school teacher. Do we need to redact where she works? Of course we do. Because if I'm hearing a criminal trial and these guys want to go out and whack somebody, right? So you have to have, there's reasonable redactions. But as far as where all the money is, and the forms themselves are very vague, right? It's like I have somewhere between $1 and $1 million in this company, right? So they're vague, but at least gives you an idea of where the money is. Yes, sir.
What grounds would Trump be impeached on?
It doesn't matter. You could say anything you want.
So he's a New
Collusion. Russia. I mean,
He's a New Yorker. He'll agree to everything and then do what the hell he wants.
in large part, I think your analysis may be exactly on the nose, right? So but I mean, not everybody understands that. I mean, I jokingly said that we're in the 6th borough right now, right? So from here south it's like an annex of Queens, right? So everybody understands that here. But if you go out to Indiana or someplace, they look at you like, well, what do you mean? He said this. It's like, for example, this is the great one. I jokingly say I was born in Long Island, Rockville Center, just outside of Queens, and I say I speak New York, right? So when the president says, Obama wiretapped me, let me translate that for you, okay? So that's New York talk for persons in the Obama administration unlawfully used signals intelligence for political purposes in order to attack me and my administration. That's the long Washington answer for Obama wiretapped me. Now, did Mr. Obama put on a little hard hat and his little Verizon jacket and go in and play with wires? No. I mean, if you want to turn it into a cartoonishly simplistic example, and that many people do wish to do that, that is not true. But did people within the Obama White House exploit signals intelligence in order to gain an advantage and unmask people? And were they running essentially their own investigation of a political opponent? Damn right they are. We have them admitting it. Susan Rice has been on television talking about it. Oh, we had to because we were concerned about it. Oh, okay. So in essence, right, the short New York version of Obama wiretap, it was exactly correct.
It's hard not to open the Christmas present.
Yeah, I mean that's the way it works. But a lot of people don't want to understand it that way. I don't mean to keep you all hostage. If you want to run. Yes, sir.
There's been a couple of names floated around as a replacement for Comey, like Ray Kelly and Trey Gowdy.
Yeah.
Do you have any predictions as to who might take that?
I don't know. I've heard all sorts of names floated around. I can tell you people that I know should not be. and this is just my personal opinion, of course, but I have reasons for why I think the way I do. Mike Rogers, the former congressman from Michigan, should not be the FBI director. Steve McCraw, the director of Texas DPS, their state police, also a former FBI agent, should not be the FBI director. I think I think if the administration is smart, they'll pick somebody who's incredibly boring, but is very tough on crime. If they pick a political operative who's somewhat flamboyant or notorious, like Trey Gowdy, the appointment will be mired in fighting forever. They will go back and dissect every sentence, every sigh, every thing that Trey Gowdy's ever said, and it'll just be a political football. It won't go anywhere. They need to find some federal judge who has a strong law enforcement background, who's really quite dull, but is tough as nails on law enforcement, and pick him. And that's the way to go, in my opinion.
Is it important that whoever it is has come through the FBI?
Not necessarily, no. They have to have a strong law enforcement background. So they may have been, an ADA in a city. Maybe they're a former law enforcement officer themselves. They may have been an attorney general at a state level. They do not have to have the, anointing as an FBI agent necessarily. In fact, you could argue that it's probably better that they don't, frankly, because the FBI has its own strange sort of hothouse environment that it operates in. So a little fresh air from the outside by someone who knows what the deal is, but doesn't necessarily sign up for all their sort of historical baggage that they have with it. Anybody else? Oh, Angel Azar.
Chris, the terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and so forth,
Yeah.
are they fighting with the cartels, territory?
Just the opposite. Let me talk to you about that for a second. In Sinaloa, the Sinaloa cartel has imported into Mexico Afghanis and Pakistanis to help them with the quantity and quality of their poppy harvest, because overall the poppy capital of the world is in Afghanistan, and so they have quite a good bit of expertise in that area. And so the cartels know that, and they want somebody who knows what the hell they're doing. And so they bring in Afghanis and Pakistanis because they have the quantity, quality. It's just more, better, faster, right? But along with that, those folks provide a second service, and that service is training cartel armies. Because these same people have had 15 years of combat experience against the United States, right? They know everything from IEDs to small unit tactics to how Americans operate. And that isn't hypothetical, that's not exaggeration. In May of 2015, Wall Street Journal reported that the Jalisco New Generation cartel, which is a little break-off splinter cartel from the Sinaloa cartel, the Jalisco New Generation cartel, with the assistance of foreign fighters, Wall Street Journal's words, shot down a Mexican Army helicopter. How do you think they learned how to do that? By people who have that sort of experience. And again, this is the Wall Street Journal reporting this. And then the contact I mentioned before, who talked about in Mexico City, the embassy staff sort of taunting President Trump. That same guy actually flew into Jalisco the week that happened, and he went out and saw the shot down helicopter. So this is not, well, it's just one news report. No, it's not. It's eyes on, real live. And they've shot down more since then, but it doesn't get reported. Just like the level of violence in Mexico never gets reported in the United States. For whatever reason, the media turns a blind eye to it, largely. So it's a very elaborate system where the cartels know what they're doing, right? They're a big multi-billion-dollar organization. Just like they didn't use fast and furious weapons. Look, if you're running an $18 billion company, you don't go out and buy onesies and twosies straw purchase weapons, right? It doesn't pass a giggle test. No one believes that. If you're running an $18 billion drug cartel and you want weapons, you buy them wholesale from Brazil, Israel, the Koreas, right? You buy hundreds of weapons. You don't buy onesies and twosies from a mom and pop shop in Arizona. Nobody believes that. It's the same thing with respect to these cartels. And there's an entire sort of roadmap or system where militant Islamists enter Mexico, I'll give you a great example. Tampico is a port on the Gulf. They enter Tampico, and for about $1,500, and they get to Tampico via either Cuba or Venezuela. Right? So you have militant Islamists of any number of different flavors, Al Qaeda, ISIS, even Hezbollah. Hezbollah has a counterfeiting operation in Juarez, Mexico, across from El Paso, because the Hezbollah likes to finance their own operations. They like to make money. They're the only terrorist group that actually involves itself in financing and making money for themselves. Maybe it's because they're Lebanese. I don't know. In large part, they're Lebanese. Obviously, there's also other Shia. But so they arrive in the port of Tampico, and for $1,500, Mohammed becomes Manuel. They get a raised seal birth certificate, driver's license. Mexico has a photo voter ID. You get a kick out of that. They get a voter ID card in Mexico, not here in the United States, of course. And so they get all the documentation they need for Muhammad to become Manuel. And then they go into a series of camps where they get language, culture, clothing, all these sorts of things in order to assimilate. And then the cartels, for a price, move them into the United States. And the thing is, when you have thousands of people crossing the border, although the numbers are down more recently, but over the past few years, we have thousands of people crossing the border. Pick out the raindrop from the ocean wave. You can't. It's impossible. And again, this is not speculation. We have documents from the State Department from 12 years ago, in 2004. They're up on our website. You can read them for yourselves, where it talks about two smuggling cells in Juarez, Mexico, that specialized, in the words of the reporting source, in moving Arabs into the United States. 2004. The regional security officer in Juarez was running around buying display ad space in newspapers, seeking information on this guy I mentioned earlier, Shukr Juma, on whether he was in the state of Chihuahua. So all these documents are available. No one bothers to read them. They're 12, almost 13 years old now. Very graphic details as to how they move people across, where, from Juarez into El Paso, from Palomas across into Columbus, New Mexico. That's where 100 years ago Pancho Villa raided. Remember, Pershing went into Mexico. So this stuff happens. It's all documented. I'm not making it up. So if I have State Department documents and I have Wall Street Journal reporting and all this stuff is going on, and we're largely ignorant of it. We don't pay attention to what's happening right across our southern border. Or we do, but we do it in a very cartoonishly simplistic way. Where it all becomes kind of sound bites. And you said that, and you said this. Well, let's get the whole story. Anyway. Angel, another one, Mike.
Does any other organization do something or somewhat
This is a
similar
canned
to
question.
Judicial Watch does?
No, in fact, I opened up saying that, there's all kinds of folks who do stuff. But we litigate, right? We litigate. That's all the difference. Because the initial reaction from any government agency is drop dead, right? You ask a question or you want to find something out. It's always no. That's the starting point, right? And so the only way to really get them to be accountable is through litigation. Thank you, folks. I appreciate the time to be here.